They buried it for a reason, not because it was irrelevant, but because it was too dangerous. The Book of Enoch was never meant to be forgotten. It was erased, silenced, and torn from sacred canon, not by accident, but by deliberate design. This wasn't a removal of a myth. It was a suppression of a warning, a record of the moment heaven fractured, a blueprint of celestial defiance. And once you read it, you begin to understand why. This ancient text doesn't tell you what to believe. It shows you what was lost and what was unleashed. It speaks of beings created in pure light, entrusted with dominion over realms far beyond our comprehension. Not demons, not monsters, angels, guardians, watchers. But something changed. In them, in us. They didn't just observe, they desired. They didn't just guide, they fell. The Book of Enoch is not a fable. It is a reckoning. Inside its pages, we find the untold origin of corruption, not beginning in man, but in heaven itself. It speaks of the Watchers, divine sentinels appointed to watch over humanity, who broke rank and descended into the world of flesh. Their crime? Union with women, but their fall went deeper than lust. They unlocked vaults of knowledge never meant for mortal minds, secrets of the stars, of war, of seduction, of power, and the consequences still shape the world you live in. Their offspring were not children. They were abominations, hybrids, giants, Nephilim, creatures born of angelic blood and human desire, whose tyranny turned the earth into a prison of blood and bone. But that was only the beginning. The Book of Enoch takes you into the divine courtroom, where archangels burn with justice and fallen ones are sentenced to the abyss, where Enoch, the only mortal granted access to the architecture of heaven, walks among the flames and records what he sees, what he hears, what awaits. This is not a conspiracy. This is cosmic history. Edit out your Bible, but never erase from reality. In this series, you will walk the ruins of forgotten truth. You will witness a rebellion that started in heaven and never truly ended. You'll see how power without obedience leads to chaos, how pride can twist even the most radiant light into devouring darkness, and how one man, Enoch, became the voice of judgment in a world spiraling toward destruction. You will not be the same after this. Stay with me, because once the veil is lifted, you'll understand why heaven tried so hard to hide this book from you. They were never meant to interfere, only to observe. The Watchers weren't like the angels we often imagine, winged harps and glowing robes. No, they were beings of incomprehensible rank, forged in brilliance, stationed on the threshold between heaven and earth, assigned to monitor the unfolding creation, to witness human progress, and report back to the throne of the Almighty. They were sentinels of the divine will, guardians of the line that separated the immortal from immortal. But proximity breeds temptation, and over time, their gaze lingered too long. As humanity multiplied, so did its beauty, so did its complexity. The Watchers, once aloof and radiant, began to feel something foreign ripple through their essence. Desire, not curiosity, not compassion, but a hunger they were never designed to possess. Among them was a name that history could not erase. Semjaza. He wasn't just one of them. He was their leader, respected, feared, brilliant. But beneath the splendor of his purpose, something dark began to stir. He saw the women of earth and found them beautiful. But more than that, he envied their freedom. He envied choice. For angels, there is no trial of loyalty. They are loyalty itself. But Semjaza wanted more. He didn't just fall into temptation. He engineered it. He knew that the divine creator would bring unimaginable judgment. But he also knew that alone he would be shattered. So he devised a plan, a pact, a sacred conspiracy. He gathered the other Watchers atop the summit of Mount Hermon, a place where Earth seems to scrape the edge of the stars. The wind was sharp, the stones ancient, and there, in a gathering never meant to happen, 200 divine beings stood shoulder to shoulder and rebelled. They bound themselves by an unbreakable oath, to descend into the realm of man, to take human wives, and to reveal secrets from the heavens that no mortal should ever possess. Their voices echoed like thunder across the mountains. Their oath was not whispered, it was declared, and in that moment, heaven held its breath, because what they had done was irreversible. This was an act of weakness. It was war, a deliberate severing of the divine chain of command. The Watchers didn't fall by accident. They jumped, and what they left behind was not just broken protocol. It was a shattered framework of the cosmic order itself. The wind howled across the jagged cliffs. The sky, once still, seemed to churn with unease. And upon the summit of Mount Hermon, a mountain older than empires, whose peaks scraped the veil of the divine, History was about to split in two. 200 watchers stood in silence, their forms blazing with the residue of heaven. They were not broken yet, not damned, not fallen, but they stood on the edge of something no angel had ever dared before, a decision. Semjaza was the first to speak. His voice wasn't shaken. It wasn't uncertain. It rang like the sound of a sword being drawn in the court of the Most High, and his words were simple. A proposal to defy their very nature. They would descend. They would take mortal women. They would bind themselves to earth and to its fate. But even Semjaza, as bold as he was, feared the weight of such rebellion. He knew that if only he fell, the wrath would crush him alone. So he didn't invite them. He trapped them. He demanded a vow, a sacred oath, one that no angel could break. One by one, each watcher agreed, not out of impulse, but with full awareness of what would follow. There were no illusions, no confusion, only conviction. They pressed their hands to the stone, not with ink, but with fire, with intent, with eternity. The earth trembled beneath them, as if recoiling at the blasphemy being carved into its skin. What happened that night was not just a rebellion. It was a declaration of independence from heaven itself, a severing of divine tether. They chose to leave their eternal station, to abandon their posts at the gates of stars. And with that oath, they pierced a wound into the fabric of creation, a wound that would bleed through every generation. And heaven watched without interrupting, because judgment, when it comes, is never rushed. That oath on Mount Hermon wasn't just the beginning of a rebellion. It was the ignition of a new kind of warfare, not between angel and demon, but between law and lust, between duty and desire. And now that the Watchers were bound to the earth, they would begin to reshape it in their own image. When the Watchers descended, they didn't fall like meteors crashing into mountains. They slipped into the world like shadows, majestic, radiant, untouchable. And yet, behind their divine glow, a sickness had already begun to spread. They took women from among the daughters of men, not by violence, but by awe. The women were drawn to them, to their voices that sounded like thunder wrapped in silk, to their eyes that shimmered with the memory of stars. But this union was never meant to be. It was unnatural, forbidden, a fracture in the cosmic architecture. From these unions came something the earth had never seen, and would never recover from, the Nephilim. They were not simply giants, as some translations casually suggest. They were living paradoxes, born of spirit and flesh, of heaven and earth, of light twisted by lust. Their birth was not celebrated by angels or men. It was mourned by the fabric of creation itself. These hybrids didn't grow up. They erupted into existence. They towered over trees, crushed mountains beneath their feet, and drank rivers dry. But their true power wasn't in size. It was in presence. Wherever they walked, order unraveled, peace withered, and fear, pure, ancient fear, returned to the hearts of men. They weren't just conquerors. They were desecrations, monuments to a crime that reached beyond the stars. Each one was a walking reminder that the line between the divine and the mortal had been shattered, and they knew it. They reveled in it. With the knowledge passed down by their angelic fathers, they built weapons no tribe could resist. They enslaved entire cities. They demanded sacrifice, not as gods, but as mistakes demanding worship. They became tyrants of the early world, kings of blood, lords of ruin, and worse, they bred more of their kind. Their legacy wasn't just war and domination. It was corruption of bloodlines, of cultures, of the human soul itself. Their very existence infected humanity with ambition too great, appetites too dark, and powers too deadly to remain unchecked. And heaven watched still, but not forever, because the birth of Nephilim wasn't just a result of rebellion. It was the proof that the rebellion had gone too far. The Watchers didn't come to bless humanity. They came to rewrite it. Their descent wasn't just physical. It was intellectual, spiritual, cultural. They didn't just touch the earth. They infected it with knowledge that was never meant to leave the stars. The gifts they brought were wrapped in gold, but soaked in poison. They taught men how to bend metal, not to build, but to conquer. Under their instruction, humans learned to smelt iron, forge bronze, and sharpen weapons not for defense, but for domination. For the first time in history, man could kill not with stones or hands, but with precision, with speed, with cold design. The Watchers planted blades in the hands of boys and turned them into murderers. But their corruption didn't end on the battlefield. They turned their gaze to women, not out of desire this time, but out of calculation. Azazel, chief among the corruptors, unveiled the secrets of seduction. He taught the art of adornment, how to paint the face, to conquer the body, to command attention through appearance. And with it, he shifted the foundation of love from soul to surface. Relationships, once born of covenant and depth, were now draped in vanity and manipulation. The divine image was fractured. What the Watchers gave wasn't technology. It was temptation institutionalized. They introduced sorcery, enchantment, divination. They taught men to manipulate nature, to craft talismans, to pierce the veil not by holiness but by force. They gave humanity the tools of the gods and the hearts of tyrants. Entire generations grew under the shadow of this forbidden knowledge. And slowly, what it meant to be human began to blur. The purity of Eden faded into myth, replaced by cities built on fear, ruled by steel and seduced by appearances. The line between good and evil was no longer carved in stone. It was smudged in ash and ambition. And that was the Watchers' greatest crime. Not that they gave knowledge, but that they gave it without wisdom, without restraint, without reverence. They turned the human soul into a battlefield and taught it how to destroy itself. They didn't just live among men. They ruled them. The Nephilim were not kings by lineage. They were kings by force. Their very presence shattered the balance of creation, born a forbidden union. Forged in rebellion, they rose like living cataclysms, and the world bowed beneath their feet. They were the first tyrants, not political figures, not warlords, living weapons, flesh-bound storms that carved their names into mountains and monuments with blood. Their strength defied physics. Their wisdom, inherited from the Watchers, was perverse and precise. They understood domination, not as violence alone, but as ritual, worship, control. Wherever they went, cities fell into silence. Tribes surrendered without resistance. Villages offered their children just to survive another night. And the Nephilim accepted the offerings. They drank blood like wine. They demanded sacrifices of flesh. They reshaped the early world into a theater of despair, where the strong reigned eternal and the weak were nothing but fuel for their egos. There were no laws, only decrees etched in fear. They mocked the divine. They imitated the angels who fathered them. They built altars in their own image. They made themselves gods, and humanity their slaves. But their cruelty wasn't random. It was patterned, strategic. They didn't just conquer the body. They broke the will. They turned man against man, family against family, generation against generation. The memory of Eden was erased, and in its place rose a world ruled by trauma, passed down like inheritance. Entire bloodlines were born in captivity. Whole nations forgot what it meant to be free. And all of it, was a result of a single oath made on a mountain. Now, its consequences echoed like thunder across the ages. But justice was waking, because even as the Nephilim reigned, the heavens were not idle. The cries of the oppressed, the terror of the earth, the brokenness of creation, all of it was rising. The time of judgment was near. The silence of heaven was never absence. It was warning. For centuries, the Watchers believed the sky had turned its face, that the throne they abandoned had surrendered the earth to its fate. But judgment is not loud. It's not rushed. It waits until it's irreversible. And now it was. The earth trembled not from war, but from response. A divine countermeasure was rising, not from among men, but from the core of celestial justice itself. For names ignited across the heavens, not in sound, but in light, in fire, in unspeakable presence. Michael, Uriel, Raphael, Gabriel. These were not messengers. They were not symbols. They were executors, the hands of divine law made manifest, the guardians of eternal balance. And they had been summoned not to advise, but to end. Their descent wasn't like that of the Watchers. There was no whisper, no seduction, only reckoning. Michael, the warrior, his blade didn't gleam, it roared, forged in the breath of the eternal. It wasn't made to kill, it was made to sever corruption from creation itself. He would lead the charge, not with rage, but with divine authority. Uriel, the eye, he brought no weapon, only light, unrelenting, blinding, pure. Wherever he turned his gaze, hidden sins were unveiled. No darkness could survive him. No secret could remain buried. Raphael, the healer, but not for the wicked. He came to mend terror in creation, to restore what could still be saved. But he held no mercy for the guilty. Gabriel, the voice. His arrival meant the sentence had already been passed. He was a trumpet of judgment, not its negotiator. And when these four moved, the heavens themselves moved with them. The Watchers felt it. The Nephilim sensed it. The earth, broken and violated, finally began to breathe again, not in relief but in preparation. The decree had been spoken. The watchers would be bound, in chains not of iron, but of darkness, cast into the deep, their names stricken from the halls of heaven, their stations erased, their legacy cursed. And the Nephilim would be erased, not forgiven, not spared, wiped from the world in a flood of wrath that would drown their monuments, their bloodlines, and their memory, until only ruin remained. What had begun with desire would end in destruction. The divine order was no longer silent. It was marching. The sky didn't speak. It wept. The first drop was not a warning. It was a verdict. Heavy, cold, ancient. It carried the weight of judgment, not just for a generation, but for a world that had forsaken its creator. The Nephilim, for the first time, felt fear. They had shaken mountains, split rivers, built cities of bone. But now, the heavens had turned against them. The sky grew darker, not with clouds, but with silence. The kind of silence that comes before execution. Then the rain began, not a storm, a cleansing. It didn't fall from clouds. It poured from the wrath of God himself. The ground trembled beneath their feet. The earth, once enslaved, opened her mouth like a wounded creature gasping for release. Waters rose from the depths. The sky collapsed from above. And between both realms, humanity stood condemned. The Nephilim screamed. But no armies came to their aid. No worshippers. No sacrifices. Their power meant nothing now. Their size became their curse. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The Watchers, bound in chains of darkness, watched their legacy drown. Every empire, every altar, every corrupted seed, erased in waves. But this wasn't just about destruction. This was surgery. The flood wasn't designed to kill. It was designed to purify, to reset the genetic code of mankind, to purge the poisoned bloodlines, to erase the influence of divine rebellion from the story of humanity. And yet, something deeper happened. The waters didn't just wash away flesh. They sealed spirits. The Nephilim, too corrupted for redemption, too unnatural to belong in heaven or earth, were condemned to wander, disembodied, restless. Their spirits, stripped of form, became what some would later call demons, echoes of forgotten war, trapped between dimensions, whispering through shadows, hungering for the bodies they once commanded. The waters receded, but the memory remained. What emerged from the ark wasn't just a new beginning. It was a world forever haunted by the echoes of a sin too great to be forgotten. Because even after the flood, the Watchers' fingerprints still lingered in the dust. The flood came, the giants drowned, the Watchers were chained, but their influence was never buried. Because some things, once whispered into the soul of humanity, never truly leave. When the waters receded, the earth was clean, but the memory of corruption had already become culture. The forbidden knowledge didn't sync with the bodies. It clung to the minds of men, passed on like heirlooms, carried like instinct, preserved like treasure. The art of war, the obsession with beauty, the thirst for domination. These weren't inventions of evolution. They were remnants of rebellion. And though the Watchers were no longer walking among us, their ideas were. Ideas don't drown. They became mythology. Then they became ritual. And finally, they became civilization. Kings rose who ruled like Nephilim. Priests spoke with the authority of gods. Empires were built with the same tools the Watchers taught men to forge, not just weapons of steel, but weapons of ideology. What the Watchers began wasn't just a fall. It was a template, and humanity followed it. Every age has its echoes. Cities that exalt vanity over virtue. Systems that reward domination over wisdom. Technologies that advance faster than morality. Power used not to heal, but to control. Even our highest towers, from Babylon to modern skylines, rise with the same ambition, to reach heaven without heaven. The spirits in Nephilim, restless and severed from the light, still wander. They don't possess bodies the way they once did, but they whisper, they influence, they tempt, and sometimes they inhabit. And the Watchers, though bound, their story is not over. Their fall was not the end, because rebellion, once born, becomes a seed. And seeds wait. So the question is no longer, did they fall? The question is, how much of their legacy is still alive in you? While the world drowned in blood, while angels fell and giants ruled and humanity fractured under the weight of secrets it was never meant to carry, one man walked a different path. His name was Enoch, and unlike the rest, he didn't reach for power, he reached for presence. Enoch's story is often overshadowed, tucked between genealogies and verses skipped by modern eyes. But in the unseen battle between heaven and earth, Enoch was not a footnote. He was a bridge, a mortal, of flesh, of dust, and yet chosen, not because he was flawless, but because he walked with God, not once, not twice, but daily, deliberately, in a world that had forgotten how. When the watchers fell, Enoch watched. When the Nephilim rose, Enoch wrote. While others drowned in forbidden knowledge, he became the scribe of heaven, recording visions so vast they shattered the limits of human language. His writings weren't speculation, they were revelation. He saw the divine machinery that governs the cosmos, the stars held in geometric order, the cycles of time, the watchers of the winds, the gates of the sun. He stood in the chambers where angels were judged. He heard the decrees of the Most High spoken like thunder wrapped in eternity, and somehow he survived it. But Enoch didn't just witness the judgment. He interceded. He stood before the throne, not for himself, but for the fallen. The watchers, now bound in agony, begged him to deliver their pleas to God. And Enoch, though human, walked in the fire of divine justice, carrying the words of those who had defied it. No other man had ever done that. No other man ever would. And when his task was complete, he wasn't buried. He wasn't mourned. He vanished. The scriptures say it plainly. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. He did not taste death. He was translated, not just to heaven, but into history, into prophecy, into the eternal scroll of those who rose where others fell. Enoch wasn't just a man. He was a mirror of what mankind was meant to be, a reminder that even in a world flooded by corruption, intimacy with the divine is still possible. The flood was not the end. It was only the reset. The rebellion didn't drown. It evolved. What began on Mount Hermon, a fracture in the heavens, a seduction of the soul, a war disguised as desire, didn't vanish with the Nephilim. It simply changed form. And now, it lives in every generation. This is a truth too many ignore. The battle that began in the stars continues inside you. It's not fought with spears or swords, but with choices, with whispers in the dark, with thoughts you didn't invite but cannot ignore, with temptations that echo with ancient breath. The watchers may be chained, but their seed, their blueprint, pulses through history, in kings who rule with cruelty, in scientists who unlock power without conscience, in influencers who turn beauty into a weapon, in cultures that reward pride over humility, excess over wisdom, empire over soul. And still, the guardians remain. The archangels did not retire. Their flame has not dimmed. They still stand, invisible, eternal, holding back the tide, not just around us, but within us. Because this war is not about land. It's about allegiance. It's not about angels and demons in far-off realms. It's about the daily war inside your own heart, between light and shadow, between surrender and rebellion. Every compromise, every ambition without reverence, every hunger for power without purpose. It's the same current that pulled the watchers from the stars. But so is every act of obedience, every quiet resistance. Every time you choose truth over gain, love over pride, holiness over instinct, it becomes a strike against the darkness that still creeps behind the veil. You are not just part of this story. You are a battlefield. And in this war, neutrality is illusion. The Book of Enoch doesn't just expose the past. It reveals a pattern, one that plays out in silence, in decisions, in destinies, one that cannot be escaped, only answered. So the question is not, will the war end? The question is, which side will you serve? With your words, with your time, with your soul? This story was never just history. It was a mirror. The fall of the Watchers, the rise of Nephilim, the flood that reset the world. None of it was written just to inform. It was written to warn, to wake, to remind you that the greatest wars aren't fought in the skies or beneath the sea. They're fought in the silence of choice. Pride was a seed. Power was a temptation. But the fall came from forgetting who gave them both. And now, that same choice is before you, because the war isn't over. It's still being written, in your hands, in your thoughts, in your generation. The Watchers fell for what they desired. Enoch rose because of whom he walked with. The difference was never strength. It was direction. We live in a world that exalts rebellion, glorifies forbidden knowledge, and crowns chaos as freedom. We call corruption progress. We call self-exaltation spirituality. We echo the same ancient whispers, but with modern names. Yet even now, in the midst of that darkness, the light has not gone out. You were never meant to repeat the mistakes of the fallen. You were meant to surpass them, not in power, but in humility, not in knowledge, but in wisdom, not in dominance, but in alignment. The Book of Enoch is more than a forgotten scroll. It's a code, a divine alarm buried in time, now resurfaced, because the hour demands it. So you must decide, will you follow the path of the Watchers, or the footsteps of Enoch? Because in the end, the only thing more terrifying than falling from heaven is choosing not to rise when you still can. You've now walked through a story that was buried for centuries. You've seen what angels feared and what men forgot. You've touched the edge of heaven and the shadows that once defied it. But this story doesn't end when the video does. Because truth, once awakened, does not sleep again. If this journey stirred something in you, if it made you see the world differently, even for a moment, then you're not alone. This channel is for those who are still searching, still questioning, still hungry for the truths that institutions have silenced and time has tried to erase. So take the next step. Subscribe, not just to content, but to the pursuit. Hit the notification bell and stay close, because what we uncovered here is only the beginning. There's another video waiting for you right now, appearing on the screen. Click it, keep going, because once you start walking through the hidden corridors of history, you can never go back to sleep. Until next time, keep your eyes open, keep your soul anchored, and never stop seeking the light, even in forbidden places.